Great. Good morning, all, and welcome. Get to have our regular Bible study for the first time in a bit, but that's all right. We've had good special Bible studies with President Turner and the Grolkes and things. So, all right. So we're continuing to look at the hard words of Jesus, and this week we're looking at Mark 10, 2-12. Where Jesus says divorce is adultery. All right, so which again sounds like a hard word. All right, can someone read this for us, the whole passage in context?
The Pharisees came up and in order to test him asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and to send her away." And Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." And in the house the disciples asked him again about this matter. And he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." And,
all right. Yep, that's all right. So what's going on here? Because this again, it seems like a hard saying. Well, some of it is that Jesus is just going back to the beginning. And he quotes the parts of Genesis and the creation account where he talks about how he created Adam and Eve as male and female, but to be companions to work together in a special way. And then in Genesis 1 we get kind of the big grand descriptions of God creating, just speaking and things happen, and then in Genesis 2 we get kind of the more hands-on view, and this is where we get God molding Adam out of clay, and where we get him taking the rib out of Adam and making Eve out of it. So then we get how they're created literally for one another, and in that then. We read in Genesis 2:24, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." So again, there's some importance of marriage, importance of that special relationship and what's going on there, and how it's was established back in creation, even back before the fall. So it's not something that comes later. It's in that in that fabric of creation.
I always like that verse because it really spoke to if you were a mama's boy.
Right. Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, and that's, I'm doing premarital counseling with a couple whose wedding I'm doing in May, and I've told them a couple times, a lot of what we do in premarital counseling is recognizing that you come from different families, and so you have different default ways of doing things, and now that you're forming this new family, you have to both realize that you're both coming in with different preconceptions, and where that's where conflict comes in. And so you have to talk through those areas of conflict and figure out how to be able to talk through those areas of conflict, because it could be as small as how you fold towels and put them in the closet, or right, or the dishwasher, or big in terms of how you handle finances, how you handle holidays, how you handle religion, even how involved you are in church, that kind of thing. And so just recognizing that it's that you've left those families of origin behind as you're creating this new family, but recognizing that you've got kind of what you bring from those families of origin together. But yeah, recognizing that it is a new family, and that sometimes you do get parents who are too intrusive into the couple's new relationship, or people who don't want to let go of their parents as much as they need to, that kind of thing. All right, any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Jeanette.
One thing that I guess Jesus really came in and he defined marriage again for
Right.
everybody, which had been done at the beginning.
Yep.
And yet you look through the Old Testament and all the concubines,
Right, yeah.
multiple wives, whatever.
Yeah.
God worked through all of that, but he really didn't condone it. I read part of the prayer had us reading Hosea this morning,
Oh, yeah,
just the
right.
first 3 verses of chapter 4, and it was about not having, it was using the example of prostitution, and that was wrong, and you shouldn't be doing that, but it relates to Israel and everything.
Yeah.
But, so I guess that thread is always there, but sometimes when you're reading the Old Testament and you see all of this, what we call fornication,
Right.
or,
Yep.
adultery and everything, and at that moment in time, it doesn't seem to be condemned in the same chapter, for instance,
Right.
or something.
Yeah.
And you get the idea that, I guess it's okay. He certainly permitted it, or allowed it to
Yeah.
happen, I guess.
Right, and yeah, that's part of what we're running into with this question when the Pharisees come to Jesus and ask, hey, can a divorce happen or not? And Jesus asks, what did Moses say? And they go, Moses said you can do a certificate of divorce, recognizing that. So this is the ideal, how things are supposed to work. Again, this all happens before the fall. Adam and Eve are created for one another before the fall, and marriage is established before the fall. But of course, after the fall, everything gets messed up, and marriage is no different. And then we have those examples then throughout Scripture of how this ideal is failed to lived up to. And has failed to be lived up to, repeatedly by people that are even held up in somewhat high regard. You have, looking ahead, I've been thinking next Sunday the Old Testament lesson is the binding of Isaac, and so you get into that whole Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Hagar, Ishmael thing, which, happens, but is not, and is, how much of that is condemned and how much, or then, Isaac seems to only have one wife at a time, but then you get Jacob with, 2 sisters and two of their servants give him the 12 sons. Now, so, of course, some of that's because the father-in-law tricks him, and so. And then going through David and Solomon and others, and so then some of that's that difference between descriptive and prescriptive of is this just describing how things were in the culture at the time, or just describing how things happened, or is this telling us how we should be doing things? Does it just describe, or does it prescribe how we should be handling things? And a lot of those seem to be just describing. But then you can, but then God works through it all. Right? Yeah, and so then you have that.
Becomes really important.
Yes, very much so. Very much.
I liked in the book, it breaks through, whatever the reason for the divorce, if it's cheating on each other,
Right.
or an abusive relationship. But anyway, divorce is a type of death. The death of a marriage, the death of a dream, the death of a bond that God designed to be unbreakable.
Yep.
And so death is
Yeah.
final, except for the Christian, because
Right.
but I never really thought of divorce as being a death.
Right. Yeah. Makes it a lot more serious, huh? And kind of brings down that idea. Good.
It's interesting how we, even in the sermon today, I didn't grow up in the Lutheran church, and then we start lessons and in the New Testament's lessons, and even in here, right here. And then I apply it to, like, say, divorce and stuff. And now in modern time, the divorce rate is sky high. You know,
Right, yep.
Okay? So I'm thinking as we go through this whole narrative and thing, and what you just said too, said that, you know, the two wives and having kids,
Yeah.
that even happens in today's world.
Right.
But not like culturally how back in the Old Testament, you see what I'm trying to do?
Right, yeah, so although I've heard, and it's been long enough I forget where, but I've heard about, you know, missionaries working in Africa, in tribes, and where part of how the chief shows he's the chief is because he's got the bigger, he's got the most wives. And so then what happens when the tribe becomes Christian, this leader becomes Christian? What does he do with the extra wives? And so, but focusing in here, that again, that recognition of how,
It is sacred.
that marriage should still be held sacred, but we don't for a variety of reasons, and our culture works really hard to make it not seem that way, despite, you know, I mean, you know, the build up for, you know, the cultural expectations of a wedding, but then, you know, and in theory we've got, you know, condemnations of divorce and adultery and things, but in practice, and what we see in the culture, you know, that will change.
Let me finish this. I always wonder about, because like within my story,
Yeah.
is I have half brothers and half sisters.
Right.
And one sister by the same mom. So, you know, and it gets deep. I didn't even want to, you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, again, that recognition that, ideally things should have stayed together, that they didn't, but so now you have this messy family. But God works through these messy families as He
And that's
does.
the reminder.
Yep, yeah,
Did you notice in the book, divorce rate isn't getting that high?
because people aren't getting married as
aren't
much,
getting
yeah.
married, they're just living together.
Yep. All right. So again, Jesus starts off with the ideal, the how things were created at the beginning, and then he moves to this Deuteronomy. So what does Moses say about this? He says, "When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. And if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. And you shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance." All right, so where we start talking about this idea of a certificate of divorce is in Deuteronomy, as God is establishing what the people in Israel are supposed to do now that as they're entering into the promised land. Deuteronomy, the second law, that's Moses' farewell sermon essentially. So kind of a reminder, hey, all these things that we told you about before, you need to remember as you go into the land you're getting. Because you didn't listen the first time, we wandered for 40 years. Now if we're going back in, if you don't listen, then you might not be able to stay here. And this passage gets into a lot of things, but I think the important thing to note is that man can write a certificate of divorce, but he just puts it in her hand and then she's out. Note how it's the man doing it to the woman. The woman seems to have little to no rights here, and that he seems to not have any real reason that if she finds no favor in his eyes, or found some indecency in her, which is kind of nice vague language, which, so in some cases, if the language is vague, it can work in your favor. So we get this essential idea that God allows these certificates of divorce, or Moses allows these certificates of divorce, because he recognizes situations are messy, but that's not the ideal, and it's not supposed to work that way. That's what Jesus is pointing back to. All right, any thoughts, questions, comments on that? All right, and then once we get to the New Testament, course, Paul takes up this idea of marriage, and as he's going through telling the Ephesians, after he's established okay, you are Christians, this is what you believe, this is how you act, and this now the last part of Ephesians is kind of how do you live out your faith? How does what we've talked about apply in your everyday life? And he goes through talking about relationships, the marriage relationship, relationship between parents and children, and relationship between masters and slaves, or we use that to refer to employer, boss employee kind of things. But so writing to the Ephesians, Paul writes, "Then therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." So that's quoting right from Genesis. And this mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. And so one of the things he refers back to is that idea that part of why marriage is so important, not only is it because that way from the beginning, but because it shows us how Christ and the church relate. And in that sense, then he's building off of what happened in the Old Testament, where marriage was the relationship between God and his people. That's why, Hosea gets told to go marry a prostitute and live out this idea of how the people of Israel are treating God, because their idolatry is like committing adultery against God. I had an Old Testament professor in seminary who talked about how, up to Mount Sinai, God and Israel are just dating. But then once they've signed that agreement, then they're married from then on. And God keeps his side of the bargain, God keeps his covenant, but Israel fails to. Well, heck, even before Moses comes down the mountain, they're busy worshiping a golden calf. So that's the other important part of marriage, is that it's reflecting the relationship between God and his people. All right. But then, of course, recognizing that idea that we are living in a society in a world where sin's messed up everything. This is how things are supposed to work. Sin has entered into the world, and things don't work the way they're supposed to. And so then Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, right, and this is, if I'm remembering right, it's right after he's started talking about lust is committing adultery. It's also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. So this is Jesus. He'll quote Moses and then kind of take it further. So whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And so this is still kind of building off of that passage we started with from Mark, recognizing that, again, divorce is not supposed to be happening. It happens, but then recognizing that it comes with brokenness, even death of a relationship, and then what happens afterwards affects things too.
How do you define adultery?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, so so adultery would be having a relationship with someone who's not your spouse, is probably the simplest version. And I think lust can play into that. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, if I'm remembering right, and I forgot to double check all the context, but this is as Jesus is talking about. Well, he said, you've heard it said, "Don't kill," but I say, if you hate your brother, you've murdered them. You've heard it said, "Don't commit adultery," but I say, if you lust after a woman in your heart, then you've committed adultery in your heart. Kind of recognizing the thoughts that lead to the actions.
So if one spouse is unfaithful, the other spouse has justification for divorce.
Right.
And I would say unfaithful means sexuality.
Right. Yeah. I mean and he talks about that in the book here. But the two general reasons recognized for a divorce is, is infidelity, unfaithfulness, and abandonment, and then abuse gets recognized in that now too. But also, again, you have that idea that if it's just because it's permissible grounds for divorce doesn't necessarily mean that's what has to happen. And we'll touch on that in a second. Cam, did you have a question, or?
Yeah, that's kind of my question. On sexual immorality, is that the phrase that's other translations have had marital unfaithfulness, which kind of makes it seem a little broader? Or is that a different passage?
Could be. I mean, it gets translated in a couple different ways in a few different places. And yeah, sometimes it's specifically marriage unfaithfulness, and sometimes sexual immorality includes a broader category of what would be included in that. Let's see. Do you have? Okay, I don't see as what this word is specifically in this point, but.
So when you're doing premarital counseling and you get to the part for better or for worse, how do you define that part of the vows, if it's in vows nowadays?
I would say for the most part that stays. I mean, if anything, it's people get uncomfortable with the part from the beginning of Ephesians 5, that chunk where it talks about, wives, submit to your husbands, and that kind of bit. But kind of that recognition that you will both change, that your circumstances will change, and just recognizing that you're a team and need to work through that. And that comes up, both in terms of conflict resolution, that you don't want to win an argument and lose the relationship. You want to remember you're a team and work together. And also in that, again, I just went, when I was doing premarital counseling yesterday, we went right through the, some myths that people believe about marriage, and one of them is and some of those ideas of everything's going to be perfect after we're married, that kind of thing, recognizing that, which with the couple I was working with, the wife-to-be is a social worker, so she sees people believing some of these myths in her work and recognizes, yes, no, this we know this is, we know things are, so they're mature enough in that way to recognize that. But yeah, that idea of recognizing that, you don't know, you're making this commitment, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you have each other and you have these promises. And the other way we spin that too is also that recognition that in the Lutheran marriage service, if we both out of the hymnal and what we use if we don't, they don't say I do, they say I will. It's not a one-time promise, it's an ongoing, continuous promise.
So that's
we build
what
on
I do
too.
with, just you say I will.
Yeah.
Handle, gosh, I lost my thought. Happier ever after.
Yeah, for happy ever after, for better, better for worse. Because again, we're raised with these Disney movies that, that the prince saves the princess, they get to the marriage, the wedding, and then the film ends and everything ends happily ever after. And then that recognition, of course, that life doesn't just end there. But yeah. All right, any other thoughts there? All right. All right. So again, it's this recognition of sin messing up what was promised, but how things should have been, but now getting into how do we live with those effects of sin, both avoiding falling into more sin, but then recognizing where there's forgiveness. All right. Paul talks about marriage too in 1 Corinthians 7, although this tends to be more of a, I wish you were all single like I was, because then you could focus on being missionaries like I am. But I know you're not all like me, so I guess you can get married. Although I probably would have taken a special woman to marry Paul. But all right, so to the rest I say, I, not the Lord. And so this is also one of those things that how much of this is God, what God says, and how much of this is the human author's opinion. Here at least Paul's kind of saying, well, this is just me. That if any brother has a wife who's an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? All right. And so again, this is Paul's dealing with the fact that, as he's ministered in Corinth, as the church in Corinth is growing, you don't have families all coming to faith instantaneously together. Sometimes you do, and you have the whole households being baptized. But sometimes you don't. And so if you have a believing husband whose wife's not believing yet, or believing wife and the husband doesn't believe yet, saying don't get divorced just because you've come to faith and they haven't. Because if nothing else, you've got that opportunity to show them what you believe, how your faith has changed you, and the Holy Spirit can work through that to bring them to faith too. But if they decide they're divorcing you, then that's not your problem. It's not your fault. All right? Yeah, Don.
I remember touring the ancient ruins of Corinth in Greece, and the tour guide was talking about the city and all that, and then he said, see that hill up over there? That was the place where orgies occurred. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, and then he was referring to the fact that Paul's time, that's the way it was in that city.
Right.
So I guess Paul had to try to change that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Paul's working against the culture there, certainly in a variety of ways by what he's doing, and so how he's telling the Christians to live, and that's certainly one of those ways too. All right. So again, we kind of talked that again. Just because there are biblical grounds for divorce, again, tend to be infidelity, desertion, and abuse. There isn't a command to divorce. Reconciliation is possible if safe. So again, just because you're in those situations, that there can be forgiveness for people who've cheated, or people who've abandoned their family, or forgiveness and abuse. Although that idea of forgiveness can be a challenge and be abused as well, to keep people in abusive relationships. All right. And also all right. And then recognizing too that as Jesus and Paul are dealing with divorce, that at least as Jesus is answering the question from the Pharisees about divorce, one of the situations that's in his mind, in the mind of the people around him, is this one. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John the Baptist and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he'd married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So part of it, is that John the Baptist has been arrested because he's been telling the king, hey, you shouldn't be married to your brother's wife, because both Herod and Herodias had gotten divorces because they wanted to be together. and, you know, abandon those spouses. And so if you start talking about, well, no, you're not supposed to get divorced, you know, the leaders get upset if you're pointing things out to them. Although Herod seems to not be as angry about it. Herodias, his wife, is the one who, you know, holds a grudge long enough to demand John the Baptist's head on a platter. Herod's fine arresting him, but yeah. So just kind of recognizing that, you know, as he's talking about this, is he going against somewhat culture, but he's going against what the head guy's doing. So. All right. Then some discussion questions. I think we're kind of, and Ron was talking about this earlier. Statistics show a correlation between declining divorce rates and declining marriage rates. What effect do you think a declining marriage rate has on our society?
A lot, because you don't have the family elements anymore.
Yeah.
It seems to be such an
Yep.
important building block. And if people don't regard that, I don't know. It's going to be all for
Yep.
nothing.
Yeah.
Everybody for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's wrong.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, so I mean, the catch is that there's a lot of these things are if there's, you know, people who grow up in a stable family are statistically more likely to succeed. People who get married and have have kids in that order are more likely to have to succeed, both in terms of staying together and in terms of being able to make it on their own, on their own. You know, we work with some of the, you know, social service agencies in town. The part I'm involved in is the Home for a While program, where we give people 90 days to kind of have an apartment and kind of catch their breath and get on their feet. And most of the people that we're interviewing, although it's changed a bit, most of the people are people from, you know, are single moms with kids, and, you know, can't make, you know, hard to make it when you don't have, you know, I mean, just trying to manage childcare by yourself, you know, while trying to work is a huge thing. So
I think it's a big problem in America because there are certain groups, or I think area ethnicity is having a problem, especially in the community that I grew up in as a person of color. Let's say it went from 15% to 70%. And what you have is it affects the kids. You don't have any stability. You don't have a husband or a man in the building, you know, to show guidance to the kids. And, I mean, I grew up with a father, and the only reason why I didn't have a mom because she passed away, but I had guidance. But as a teacher, and I would see it, and not only in the black community, but the Latino, even in you know, every ethnicity. I mean, it's you see a lot of the crime and all this and that. All the statistics points to a stability in the family, morals, values, the whole thing. I do have to put out there, I have a view on racelessness. So I tend to, though, you know, not saying I don't see color, I just say it's race atheist, if you get what I'm trying to do. So, well, with that, I'm not blind to it, and we should not be blind to it.
well, and because you've also got, I mean, two factors that, you know, people will think that, I mean, part of the declining marriage rates is people are waiting longer and longer to get married. But also the separation tends to be people in the lower income brackets just aren't getting married at all. Upper ones, they're getting married later. So that just creates kind of a disparity there too.
I'm referring to like a single mom or a single dad, you know, that type of thing.
All right. What have you observed to be the main reasons why marriages fall apart?
I don't know if it's true, but people just say, we fell out of love.
So I don't know if we should be buying that.
Right. Well, yeah, well, if love's something you fall into and it's all about the emotions and the feelings, then if you fall out of love, or you got to follow your feelings. That's certainly a part of it. Again, something that seems to be, watch TV shows, watch rom-coms, movies, things like that. I mean, it's going to be those kind of things, that it's all about the feeling.
Depends on which political side you're on.
Right. Right, we've got, one candidate who's been divorced twice and another who's remained faithful. So, always a challenge there, huh? All right. So what do you see as keys to making marriages strong?
Working together.
Working together, yep.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
With the other one, I think that's one of the reasons for.
Right.
I mean, marriage is work.
Mhm.
You're bringing two totally different people together, and
Yeah.
they're trying to form a good relationship
Yeah.
and a good family, and it's a lot of work.
Yep, it is.
Especially when you take that emotional attraction, which kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, settles down a little bit, and then, I don't know, it's hard.
My parents were a united front.
Mhm.
It's like you couldn't work each parent. You could do something. I mean,
Right.
they're
Yep.
tough.
And kids try and do that, don't they? Yeah, Marcia.
I say having Christ is sound in the relationship.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah. In the book he mentions that the unity sand ceremony that happens a lot at weddings, recognizing that I've done a few weddings too where they use that 3-chord idea from Proverbs, or from Ecclesiastes rather, with that idea of kind of, the groom, the bride, and Christ in the middle, and how you need all three for the marriage to last, definitely. Good.
I think taking me out of the equation
Yeah.
helps a lot. It's us together.
Yep.
We're one.
Yeah, one of the premarital books
You have your personality, but
Yeah.
but you're together.
Yeah.
And people don't know how to do that.
Yeah, one of the premarital books I have in my office is called From Me to We. Recognizing that idea.
But is that bad? Like me, because initially, if you don't focus on me, then how does the team get strong as well? I mean, I'm trying to make a positive.
Well, and that's that idea that that there's that balance of like all good things can be twisted by sin, and so I have my dreams, my aspirations. If my wife doesn't share it, well, then I should just trade her in for a younger model and keep going, right? Or an older, more mature model that'll help with the career ambitions or whatever. That I mean, and that's that I don't feel fulfilled in my marriage anymore is one of those things that'll pop up as people use to justify it. But recognizing too that you don't just become a blob where it is just the two of you and you can't differentiate between the two of you. That balance between, and it's blanking on the terms, but being able to differentiate yourself, but not,
Yeah,
So,
what Barb just,
yep,
Instead of being competition.
yeah.
what
So,
Barb said, it is like if you have a mindset for Christ in everything that you do,
yeah,
and you demonstrate that, you model that, you're in everything you do. So even if it looks like it's about me, it actually is about Christ.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
and that's the ideal that we need to end up with. So, all right, we're gonna stop here. We've got some brass practicing for late service, and so thank you very much for coming. We'll move on to the next chapter next week, which is which one? It's also
Marriage in heaven?
oh yes, no marriage in heaven. So that'll be our idea for next week. So thank you very much for coming.
I